What is up, Canada? What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here. Third time's a charm. This might be a long one because it's taken us a while to even get this stream working, but fingers crossed, this is going to work.
Yesterday, when I asked about the 850,000 Canadians who've lost their jobs, giving Canada the highest unemployment rate in the G7, the Prime Minister told a childish joke, and he sat down and smirked. He should know that for every 1 percentage point increase in unemployment, we get a 2 percentage point increase in suicides. This is people's lives at stake. They want to know how they're going to pay the bills. We have the worst job record in the G7. Will we get a plan for paychecks, or is the Prime Minister just going to sit there and smirk?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker.
So yeah, if you guys aren't following Pierre on Twitter there, you're doing yourself a disservice. Really encourage you guys to jump over and give him a follow. I'm really enjoying it, but today, essentially what we're going to be talking about, we've got a lot to talk, is it really safe to extend COVID-19 vaccine intervals? How do Canadians feel the government has handled the vaccine rollout? And how have Canadians interacted with alcohol and cannabis during the global pandemic? So first things first, let's jump into talking about some of the doubts raised around the extended vaccine intervals. So if you guys haven't been paying attention, essentially the Canadian government decided, we don't have enough vaccines, even though we said we were going to have enough vaccines. So let's just stretch the doses, because that sounds like we can kind of play some mental math there and say that, hey, we got everyone a dose. So last week, Canada's National Advisory Committee on Immunizations, that's NACI, I think, NACI, said it would be safe to extend 2-dose vaccine intervals from a matter of weeks to upwards of 4 months. I'd love to get your thoughts and your opinions, as well as your sources. Have you guys been following along with this? And NACI wrote, current evidence suggests that high vaccine effectiveness against symptomatic disease and hospitalization for several weeks after the first dose, including among older populations. Part of the goal behind the strategy would be to ensure that more Canadians at least receive their first dose, as opposed to waiting additional weeks or months for it. Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia have embraced this idea of extended vaccine dose intervals, but there is also external dissent. So this week, doctors from the University of Toronto, University Health Network, Sunnybrook Research Institute, Princess Margaret Cancer Centre, and the Montreal Clinic Research Institute signed a letter in which their concerns were raised about extending the time period between the first and second vaccine doses. And Global News obtained a copy of this letter from an Ontario government source, and part of it read as such. What will the impact on the variants of concerns and potential others? This will remain a guessing game without being able to transfer knowledge from properly performed trials. This is a big factor behind all this. And so continued the letter, at a minimum, there should be stratification for the second dose, where the elderly, immunocompromised, and individuals in high-risk groups are given the second dose according to the recommended schedule, 21 to 28 days after the first dose. Sources informed Global News that this letter was sent to Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, as well as the Government of Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. In response to the letter, Dr. Tam in Canada is still studying the immune response of 2 months and counting after the first dose. So said Dr. Tam, so if that level of immunity is not expected to suddenly drop, increasing the flexibility of the ability of provinces to deliver the first dose, which is really safe and effective to as many people as possible to prevent deaths and hospitalizations, is paramount at a point in time where we're in a bit of a delicate situation, where the epidemiology is that we still have thousands of cases a day, hospitalizations, and death. This was felt to be the most important objective. So, Tam went on to add that despite NACI recommendations, having 4 vaccines now approved in Canada could mean individuals will not need to experience a 4-month gap between shots. Now, if you've been following along with this, none of the actual drug manufacturers have came out and said that they would recommend doing this. The little bit that I've seen where they've been asked to comment, it seems like they're sticking to their initial recommendations in regards to the dosages and the timings of those dosages. Love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. To me, at the end of the day, this is all just smoke and mirrors, but it is a lot of noise. It is a lot of distraction. I mean, if we're going to spend a shit ton of money on this stuff, let's at least make sure that we use it the way it's supposed to be used, so that at least if it doesn't work, we can point out that, hey, it didn't work. Where right now, what we're doing is it's going to make it really difficult to compare our data, right? Like it's going to be hard to know. We're going to just stretch it without that stratification that we mentioned earlier, which means we'll have no other basis to go back and compare, no benchmark. I think it's just going to create a wild mess, would be my opinion. I bet we end up spending a lot more on vaccines than anyone's anticipating. But we'll come back to government spending way too much money a little bit later in the story. So number 2, let's talk about how do Canadians feel about the government's vaccine rollout. So March 11th, 2021 marked the 1-year anniversary of COVID-19 being declared a global pandemic. I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but it seemed like mainstream media was actually nostalgic for this date, right? Like it seemed like they were kind of whimsical, like what a fun year it's been. We've got so many news stories out of this news cycle. But during that time, more than 2.5 million people from around the world have died, allegedly, from the virus, including more than 22,000 Canadians. Currently, Canada has approved vaccines from Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson. However, the rollout of said vaccines continues to feel slow when compared to other developed nations. Recently, Nanos Research conducted a poll to determine how Canadians feel about the government's vaccines rollout. On a federal level, 37% of respondents believe the government of Canada has done a very poor job. 30% offered a neutral impression of the situation, while 32% feel the government has done a very good job. Let me know, where do you land? Seems like we're kind of split into thirds there. Provincially, only 26% of people think their government has done a very poor job with its vaccine rollout plans. 32% feel that a very good job has been done, while 30% still have that neutral opinion. Kind of interesting that in both studies, 30%. Are we just the 30% where you guys shrugged along with me? If you were in that survey, you was like, I don't even give a fuck. When looking at the regional rankings more closely, Ontario gave its province an average score of 5.4 out of 10 when it comes to how successful its government has handled the vaccine rollout. The score was 5.7 out of 10 in the prairies. Conversely, Quebecers gave a result of 8 out of 10. So it seems like Quebec is the most happy with their government's approach to the vaccine rollout. So this Nanos report has also showed how people are feeling about the vaccine once it is available to them. 71% of Canadians still plan on definitely getting the vaccine when it's available. Let me know in the comments, are you among those 15 or those 71 that definitely plan on getting the vaccine? Only 6% said they definitely won't take it. Commented Nanos Canadians from Ontario, 75%, BC, 74%, are more likely to say they will definitely take the vaccine when it's available compared to residents from the prairies, which were 65%, and the Atlantic provinces, which were 66%. Now, since the vaccines have been developed at a much quicker pace than many people are used to, there's been some question about how safe they are. According to Nanos, 61% of Canadians trust that whichever vaccine they take will be safe. 25% believe it will be somewhat safe, while 5% do not believe the vaccine they take will be safe. Topic 3 now. Moving on to this. Canadians don't think life will return to normal until at least 2022. Yeah. That's probably very optimistic of you Canadians. In a new Ipsos poll commissioned by Global News, it was discovered that a lot of Canadians do not expect life to return to pre-COVID levels of normalcy anytime soon. 38% of those polled believe that normalcy for Canadians will not return until at least 2022. Interestingly, a sizable chunk of people do not see a normality coming back that quick. 17% believe normalcy won't come back until 2023. 5% said 2024, and 7% said they think it won't be until 2025 or later. What's up to my fellow 7%ers, apparently? A staggering 7% do not believe we will ever get back to pre-COVID levels of normalcy. There are optimists out there, however, as 28% of those polled think we'll turn things around by this winter. Hey, if you guys are placing bets, I'm happy to take your free money. So anyways, moving on, commented Ipsos, public affairs CEO Daryl Bricker. I think that Canadians are telling us in this survey is that it's been a year now, so anything that they thought was easy before, they've learned is not easy. They have a desire to get back to things, but they are, I would say, hedging their bets a little bit because they know that this is difficult. So, as we all know, COVID-19 has also had a sizable impact on employment. So that's this is referencing back to that initial little clip we showed with Pierre. So despite so many jobs being lost or hours and wages being scaled back, 58% of those polled are optimistic about regaining employment as soon as the economy recovers. 67% of respondents aged 18 to 34 had this perspective, while 52% of people aged 35 to 54 feel the same way. So it sounds like the younger generation is actually more optimistic. So 36% can't wait to put away their masks, while 35% look forward to hanging out with friends again. 31% are ready to invite extended family back into their homes, while additionally 26% of Canadians are ready to travel internationally and dine at a restaurant without restrictions. You crazy kooks, you. 23% are wanting to have physical contact with others again. What an absurd notion. Topic 4 now. A look at how Canadians have managed alcohol and cannabis intake during the pandemic. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. I definitely call my dealer more often. Since the pandemic has forced many of us to stay home and radically adjust how we operate on a day-to-day basis, there's been a lot of focus on how people are coping and how they're maybe turning to different substances, including alcohol and cannabis. So recently, Stats Canada issued the results of its alcohol and cannabis use during the pandemic survey. And interestingly, the first thing we learned is that 54% of Canadians who had previously consumed alcohol or cannabis before the pandemic did not change their habits once the pandemic began. So apparently 54% of people stayed the exact same pre-pandemic as during pandemic. As it relates to alcohol specifically, only 24% said their alcohol consumption grew during the pandemic, 22% decreased. In January 2021, 66% of Canadians 15 and older, which equals nearly 21 million people, consumed alcohol at least once in the previous 30 days. Most of these people classified their drink intake as moderate. But if you actually look back to alcohol consumption studies, usually when you actually look at it, most people misdefine what moderate is when you actually look at what is recommended by, say, a doctor or a health professional. But anyways, another 31% admitted to having 2 adult beverages. On the other side of the scale, 18% of respondents had 5 or more drinks on the days they consumed alcohol in the previous month. This number was higher than what occurred pre-pandemic. However, even though alcohol intake increased more for many Canadians since the beginning of the pandemic, 22% of people said their consumption actually decreased during the time. And Stats Canada reported 60% of Canadians drank more out of boredom, while another 58% did so out of stress. So are you stress drinking or are you bored drinking? Let us know in the comment section. 53% cited convenience as a reason for drinking heavier. This was tied to having irregular work schedule and how being at home provides easier access to alcoholic beverages. And 37% drank more out of loneliness, while 17% did in an attempt to resolve insomnia. As for those drinking habits have subsided during the pandemic, 58% decreased opportunities for socialization led to their cause for less drinking. 46% said credit personal choice as a reason they chose to slow down their consumption. Now, moving on to cannabis, according to January findings from Stats Canada, 16% of Canadians reported using cannabis at least once during the previous 30 days. Out of that collective, 35% said their cannabis consumption increased during the pandemic. 43% of respondents said 15 to 29 reported increased cannabis usage during the pandemic. So only 22% of those 65 plus had more cannabis than usual, followed by 20% of people aged 50 to 64. So it seems like it really was that younger generation that was toking more during the pandemic. And 25% said they consumed cannabis 5 or more days per week in the previous 30 days. Okay, so like almost every day. Gotcha. And out of those who began using cannabis more during the pandemic, 45% said they often or always felt a lack of companionship during the pandemic. Meanwhile, 65% increased cannabis intake due to stress. So there's a lot more stats here I could keep throwing at you guys, but I just think it's interesting to look at this because as time goes on, we're going to find that there was a lot more unintended consequences in regards to these, social experiments of quarantine, lockdown, isolation, all that different stuff. I believe Pierre mentioned in the clip we showed you guys that, as we see an increase of 1% in the unemployment rate, we usually see a 2% increase in suicides. And I think there will be a lot of mental health issues here. There's just a lot of people that had habits broken without the opportunity to replace them with other habits. And so they naturally just started to deteriorate. I've talked about this before in the past multiple times on my YouTube channel, but I'm a huge believer that in life, you're either growing or you're dying. And now you may be growing in one aspect of life and dying in another aspect of a life. But I always see that binary thing. There's no such thing as treading water in life. It's very rare. You're likely kidding yourself. If you think you're treading water, you're probably actually losing ground. So for me, I think the real concerning thing is this is going to catch up to people, right? Like, again, a day of this, a week of this, a month of this, a year of this maybe doesn't wear them down. Maybe that's not the straw that breaks the camel's back. However, 2 years of this, a decade of this, a lifetime of this, this is really going to change people. And Well, I may joke about it. I am in that 7% of people that don't think things are ever going to return to normal. And one of the ways you can get this sense, I think, from our government and leaders, again, I'm not trying to claim that there's some crazy cabal out there that's trying to take over the world. This is just natural. Any system, any organism naturally wants to defend itself and ideally collect more resources and power, right? That's what every animal, every plant, every living organism naturally has a tendency to do. And a government, any organization, a health board, whatever the case may be, that's just another organism. And it's just out there trying to defend its territory, trying to grow its little fiefdom. And so naturally, emergencies like this, pandemics, create a great opportunity for them to gain control, gain perspective, and they may even have great underlying motivations or intentions, but I think they lack to understand the unintended consequences that come from these actions they're taking. And so, you can see this when you see individuals questioning the government of like, hey, we implemented this mask mandate without any sort of benchmarks. At what point in time do we take it away, right? Like just what percentage? Can we just get a benchmark so that we understand when we're allowed to go back to normal? Everyone's talking about this generic go back to normal, but no one's setting an actual line in the sand where we're at least told when we get to, right? This is literally really reminiscent of 1984 where you don't even know the rules anymore. Like it's not uncommon for me to ask one of my coworkers, one of my staff members, like, hey, am I allowed to do this now? Are we allowed to have 5 people over to the house? Like, unless you're constantly glued to mainstream media, how do you even know what the rules are at this point in time, right? Like, they are so dynamically changing. In a pre-TV internet era, you could have never hoped to roll out rules this fast because you could never disseminate the information quickly enough to actually expect a large percentage of the population to be aware of these new rules. And yet there's now just this blind assumption that we should be adhering to these rules when, again, like other than going to direct government websites, it's really just mainstream media. And it appears that oftentimes mainstream media actually has a better dissemination of this information than our government websites do at the initial announcement, right? Which again is very concerning because essentially is enforcing us to have to consume that sort of content if you want to know whether you're breaking the law or not. It's a nice day today. If I decide to go outside and walk, can I walk with other people? Do I have to wear a mask? Do I have to cross the street if someone else is walking towards me, right? Like if I go into the store, do I still need a mask? At what point in time will we be told we don't need masks, right? Like, when it's truly a once in a lifetime emergency, maybe we're all willing to slap masks on really quick. But at what point in time do we get to take them off, right? And I think that that's really the concern here that I hope you guys have. It's certainly the concern I have. And we just need to be paying attention. And I'm glad that there are certain politicians that at least are trying to improve things. Again, I don't think that there's many Canadian politicians that are doing a perfect representation of at least my opinions and views. But anyways, moving on to topic number 5 today. Canadians are not interested in using cash. So the world has changed a lot during COVID-19, and new data released by Payments Canada, we learned that Canadians continue to spend less money during the pandemic than they did before. Additionally, Canadians are showing an ongoing reluctance to handle cash payments, terminals, and ATMs. Want to hear something kind of funny / maybe embarrassing? I don't know. I'm pretty sure I just discovered that my ATM card has been expired for probably over a year now. And that's why when I tried to use it at an ATM, the last week, it didn't work. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on. I got a feeling that they must have mailed me a new one. I just never activated it. It's bizarre that I could go a year without visiting a bank or having to use my ATM card other than to log in to online banking. Interesting times. But I'd love to hear your anecdotal experience as well. But overall, 58% of Canadians said they are spending less money now than they did pre-pandemic. Let me know, have your spending and consumption patterns changed? And is it for the better or the worse when it comes to your personal finances? Meanwhile, 42% admit that COVID-19 has changed their long-term payment preferences to digital and contactless. Digging deeper into these numbers, 53% of Canadians are using less cash than they did prior to COVID-19. I don't think that's shocking, right? If you don't interact with humans, if certain stores literally stop accepting cash, which used to be against the law for them to not accept fiat currency issued by your government. But at least during a phase there was places that were just like, no, we don't accept cash anymore. So like that doesn't really surprise me. Like when you force people at the end of a stick, a pointy stick at that, to not use cash, I don't think that you could really say like, yes, it is technically their behavior patterns changing, but it's because of extreme enforcement. Same with 67% of people using less ATMs, obviously, right? 54% of people try to not exceed their contactless payment limit when shopping in store. Now that's kind of interesting. I wonder though, like, oh, okay, so that's like the tap thing. So you guys are literally too scared to put in your pins. Gotcha. Interesting. Well, that seems silly, but okay. I guess I am kind of that way, but it's more laziness than anything else. Like I actually just like the quick in and out, but it's not because I'm scared of getting COVID from a punch pin. Another way to get around using cash and handheld payment terminals is by using e-transfers, and they've noticed a substantial increase in those as well. In all, 25% of respondents say they use e-transfers more now than they did pre-pandemic. While overall spending might be down, 49% of Canadians are embracing e-commerce platforms more than they did before COVID-19. And then despite the financial hardships many people are experiencing at the moment, 40% of Canadians reported tipping more than they did pre-COVID-19. That's interesting. So anyways, moving on to topic number 6. I'm not going to talk on this one long because it's probably just going to get me into trouble, but it does get my blood boiling. $255 million was just announced to upgrade or improve our homeless shelters to deal with the COVID-19 outbreaks, because if you weren't paying attention, there was like 981 homeless people last year in Ontario that got COVID. So we need to spend $255 million to make sure that doesn't happen, because 7 of those people died, apparently. I don't know if there was comorbidities there. There probably was comorbidities. There was probably pre-existing conditions there, but they don't tell us that. But essentially, you do the math. 255 million divided by 7 deaths. Is that the price of a human life here? Because we're in for some deficit spending if that's the case. If every Canadian, that got COVID and died is worth, what does that work out to be, guys? $40 million, just under $40 million per death. And if they're claiming that we've had, 22,000 people die in Ontario, or was it Canada, whichever, it sounds like, think about all the spending they could get away with. Anyways, this is just absurd. It truly is silly that this pork barrel spending of just slamming in spending and just going hog wild on it. There was only 20,000 people that were in those homeless shelters in 2020, and yet we're going to spend $255 million. Crazy. Like you could literally just cut all those homeless people a check and no longer have homeless people, because they'd be making like $20,000 each. It just like, and like, I'm sure you guys saw, but like the government said budget smudge it, or at least the federal government did. So it's crazy to think of the level of spending that's going on in this day and age. And just like everyone's just shrugging. And don't get me wrong, like I get sick and tired of it too. So I understand why you guys shrug, because I'm shrugging right along with you and Atlas, but just crazy. Anyways, according to the Ontario government, and specifically the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, this investment will provide our municipal service managers with the financial ability to take any means necessary to stop the spread of COVID-19 in shelter spaces. Yeah, I would say any means necessary with that level of spending. Again, we could just each 3D print them their own house, and now they're no longer homeless. Ontario says municipal service managers and Indigenous program partners can use this relief funding to acquire motel and hotel spaces to support physical distancing of shelter residences. So not only in Peel should you just lock your child in a room if they've got COVID, but now let's just rent out all the motels and hotels. First, we put them out of business by shutting down tourism and travel. Then we're going to support them by putting in homeless people. This money can also be put towards hiring more shelter staff, purchasing more personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies, as well as rent and utility banks that are designed to help more people avoid homelessness. Clark went on to say, at the onset of COVID-19, our government directed service managers to put outbreak management plans in place, complete infection prevention and control, IPAC education by public health officials or Health Ontario, and prepare for increases in COVID-19 cases in shelter spaces. With new COVID-19 variants of concern now in Ontario, there is an increased risk of spread to vulnerable people. That is why, in addition to new funding, we recently directed service managers to attest that outbreak management plans in all emergency shelter facilities have been updated in accordance with IPAC guidance to report any gaps in IPAC requirements and plan next steps, and to be transparent about and use the new and existing social services relief fund spending. Whew, I got to brush up on my newspeak. But anyways, according to the CBC, the City of Toronto will receive $94.5 million of the aforementioned $255 million in funding. And in 2020, more than 20,000 people used Toronto's homeless shelter. Okay, I misspoke there. I thought it was 20,000 across the province. It was 20,000 in Toronto. So let's just see. I don't know if you guys are actually going to see this, but we're going to get really technical here. I'm going to break out a calculator. So I don't know if they can't see the calculator on my screen. Oh, because I'm not sharing my screen. That's my fault. Okay, perfect. So here's my script, guys. Let's just do some basic math here. So let's actually just do Toronto's numbers because that's what I got here. That's 94.5 million divided by, they said over 20,000. Let's call it 21,000 to be generous. That's 4,500 per person that used a homeless shelter at one point in time in Toronto. It's just absurd. And again, if we go back to this total, 255 million, which I believe they said that there was 7 deaths. That's 36 million per death that occurred in homeless shelters associated with COVID-19. Again, we don't even know if there was comorbidities involved with that. If I was a betting man, I would bet yes. Or I bet an honest autopsy would have said yes. So anyways, those are kind of my thoughts. Those are my opinions on all the new government COVID news updates. I was trying to think there. Canovid updates. There we go. Those are all my Canovid updates for the week, guys. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're making the best of whatever situation you find yourself in. I hope you're starting to hold your government just a little bit more accountable. If you're not, start following along with some of the people that we've been sharing here on YouTube recently. So follow along with Pierre. Go check out Mark at Canada Poli, and just keep staying informed. Keep taking care of yourself. Really, we need to be building our financial fortress of solitude now more than ever before. So again, really want to encourage you guys to get control of your financial house, because despite all this pork barrel spending, despite all the stimulus spending, despite the billions and trillions that the government's cranking out, we all know very little of that money is actually going to see its way into our pockets just as general citizens. There's just going to be all kinds of crazy spending and support of government favored businesses. I think we all know that at this point in time. Things like SNC Lavalin and We Charity and all those other things that liberals just love to support. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure if the conservatives were in power, the NDP were in power, the Green Party were in power, all of them would fuck it up just as equally, but in slightly different ways, because government's just never our friend. We need to remember that. When whatever the 7 or 9 most dangerous words in the human language or phrases, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That is always a scary thing. Remember that, guys. Appreciate you watching this video. Smash that like button if you got value, and we'll be live on Monday.